how much of this is really making sense? Is it kind of making sense on a mental level, but I need to get to messing around with it for it to... Okay, that's kind of what I was hoping for. To be honest, that was my goal. If you could at least mentally understand the concepts, where the notes were going, why the shapes were. Now, here's the trick. Is the next step on adding this to your vocabulary. Because mostly you've been speaking A major, D major, F sharp minor, E major, and playing Trading My Sorrows Until the Cows Came Home, right? All of these songs that we all play are very diatonic, basic chords that all you have to do is memorize these shapes and these, buttons on the keyboard. The goal is to not just regurgitate the formula of the chord on the paper says BM, and that's this shape. Okay?
Yes, he did.
Okay, C sharp M. Let's say C sharp M. The chord on the page is C sharp M, and that means this shape or whatever. I want to do something with that, but I'm going to keep going.
That's probably better.
But the idea being, rather than just seeing it on the page and being a technician that just regurgitates this little formula, what I'm after is you speaking music. Because each of you is an artist and you were created to create. Not just be a technician, not just copy-paste, right? So you've got to know the language of whence you speak. Now, I can't say this often enough. I love simple. There is nothing wrong with simple. Simple is beautiful. And I do simple music all the time and put my heart into it. But we weren't designed to stay there. We weren't designed to stay drinking milk as a baby forever. And it doesn't mean that simple music is by definition babyish or immature. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not looking for just a whole bunch of cool chords. What I'm looking for is to enrich your vocabulary. Now, how do you enrich your vocabulary? Is you take a new word and you use it in a sentence. Right? Isn't that what we learned in English class? We used it in a sentence. And we used it a couple more times until it became like a word that we used. We became familiar with it. First, like, well, what does that word mean? And then you tried it out a little later. Tried out that word, and then you tried it out again, and then later you didn't even think about it because it just became part of your vocabulary, right? Okay, that's what you need to do with this stuff right here. You need to take these chords and write songs with them. You need to take these chords and write songs with them. You need to take these chords and write songs with them. And find combinations that might seem odd at first, but over time, they'll start sounding like Andrew Ehrenzeller's Covenant song, where these chord shifts just like, who would have ever thought of doing that chord? And it sounds so smooth and it sounds so cool and rich and beautiful. Because that came from him knowing this language and then doing a lot of trial and error until he went, oh, that's kind of a cool combination. Because he had to start with the language of what words he could use. Okay? There is another path towards this that is a little more of a gray area. You writing songs with these chords, that's the holy grail. That's why I pushed it forward. What's even better, though, is, not even better, what's in addition to that is being handed a song and say, hey, we're going to play this song. We're going to play Covenant by Andrew Ehrenzeller. We're going to play one of these Leonard Jones songs. We're going to play something that has these words in it, if you will, to keep the metaphor of the language going. Some piece of music, and then, oh my gosh, I've got to learn to play that chord. Don't settle for the music that is handed to you if it's easy. I've had a hard time trying to find a solution for worship musicians who get excited about going deeper, but what's asked of them on Sunday morning to play is the same old simplistic stuff. And there are some musicians who are just starting out and they're just trying to figure out where the B chord is and make sure that they're not rushing on the bridge. And I get that not everybody's at different places, but there's a huge number of worship musicians who are so bored mentally with the music that's happening, and what gets us past it is the Spirit, because we feel the presence, and our spirit is enriched and enlarged, and our brain is bored out of its mind, and our soulish musical person is also bored, and we go, well, but it's for Jesus. And we've got this spiritual high, and then it's okay. And I'm telling you that what's coming is a tri-dimensional worship that is intriguing your intellect, that is moving your emotions and your soul and exciting your spirit, all at the same time. This is one aspect of that, enriching your harmonic vocabulary and giving you more advanced words to use to start creating some better art, some deeper art with this thing. Okay? Don't settle. When you feel the presence of the Lord, know that you just stepped through the front door and you've got a big old mansion to explore. Most of us are still at that entry-level place. You don't have to stay there. It's more important that you write songs with these chords than anything else, because that will make the vocabulary be solid. It's really important that you transcribe stuff that you don't understand. If you hear something and you're like, whoa, what was that chord? Don't just remain in that blissful ignorance. Set aside some time and a place and go and take Audacity and zoom in and go over and over and write it out, and you go, oh, he just went up a minor third. Wow, that's cool. Let me play that a few more times. Let me stick that little minor third motion up into my song. And suddenly it becomes part of your vocabulary, and now we're making better art. Yeah? I mean, that's kind of the heart behind this.
Are you able to do that stuff on a bass? Technically?
That's a great question. Okay, so Chase is asking, are we able to do this stuff on a bass? And by this stuff, I'm saying you're thinking for like 4-note chords and some of this advanced harmony. I got 2 answers for you. Number 1, if you've got 4 or 5 strings on your bass, which is typical. I'm a 4-string bass guy, but you could have 5 or more. Absolutely you can. And finding where on the fretboard to make the shapes to make those chords happen is a lot of fun. And some of the higher end bass players totally play these chords in bass format all the time. However, in the context of a larger piece of music, when the bass player starts doing more than one note, there's a danger that it starts getting muddy and indistinct. And sometimes he's playing just the right chord, but it comes across as woo, because the notes aren't very distinct as they come together. So the advanced bass player in the band context would be very judicious in where he would put, or she would put, those particular chords and add those notes. As a bass player myself, I typically will only add maybe a second or sometimes a third note occasionally. Sometimes on a 2-hour burn set, if I'm playing bass, the last hour I'm doing it more and more, just to keep my brain engaged as my spirit is continually being alive. Sometimes it becomes overplaying. Now, the second part of the answer, though, is maybe more important, because for a bass player to only hold down the root note is the most, for pun intended, the most basic role of the bass player. But in actuality, the bass player is another melodic instrument. And so when the chord on the page says E, B, C sharp minor, A, the beginning bass player will just play those 4 notes. But as the bass player advances, he starts understanding the harmony, how the chords are structured, how that number system is working. And those chords that I just said would be part of the E major tonal center. So it might say E and A, and he knows, this might sound simplistic, but now he knows that he could do a E, F sharp, G sharp, A, and do a little walk into the A using those particular notes that he knows will work. And now notes that he can play in between holding down that anchor bottom note are completely informed by knowing what the chords are and knowing what's going on top of it. Let's take example, country music. A lot of times the chord might stay consistent for a while. It's E chord, E chord, E chord, but the bass might go E, B, and he's doing a root and a fifth back and forth. Very common, right? We've heard that a lot. Most bass players will know to do root and fifth at different times when it makes sense. Even though the chord is staying the 1, the E chord is staying on the band, but he's going 1 and 5, E, B, E, B. Now, if he keeps doing that and turns off his attention meter and just looks at the letters and does his root fifth pattern, and then suddenly there's a chord where the fifth is not perfect, where it's a diminished chord or an augmented chord or a flat 5, then if the bass player's not aware of this, then he's playing an E, B, and the rest of the band's playing B flats because it's a diminished chord or it's a flat 5 chord on some level. So it's great. These are just a couple of examples that it's hugely important for the bass player to understand everything that's going on, and that informs the notes that he plays in between the notes. Does that make sense? Yeah. So The higher end solo bass players, or the bass player that takes the solo in the middle of it, they're doing all kinds of chords because they're usually as versed in all of this harmony as all the guitar players and the keyboard players. They just don't venture into using it as often because of that whole muddiness in the band issue. Make sense? My favorite bass players have a really wide harmonic vocabulary. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Grant, for hooking up on the chocolate. I hope that made sense. Now we're moving on. What I'm curious about is, has there been a question on your mind about music theory, especially as you've been starting to look at all of this, that I have not covered? Is there a theory question that's popped up that you're like, well, you know, I've always wondered this thing, and we never got to that, or I'm still kind of stuck on how I would use this chord or this piece of it. Any kind of question at all that pops into your mind right now while we've got a few minutes together, and this is still kind of central to what we're doing. Anything at all. And if you have zero questions, I will still walk away happy. But I wanted to throw that in. My friend Dane Mark, if you guys know him and he wasn't able to come tonight, there's a person that I was doing the mentoring with for a few minutes, and then their life caught up with them and my life caught up with them, and I wasn't able to finish the process. And they're wanting to get back into this mentoring process, and they're asking Dane Mark about me. And Dane Mark made the statement, he said, well, Austin's really great if you ask him a lot of questions, because he really flows well with that if you come in with an agenda. So it's partly my bent, but partly I'd hate for anybody to go home and go, you know, I've always wondered this. Maybe I should have asked. He never gave me an opportunity to ask. So I'm making this long pitch to see if there's any questions on the floor. And if not, that's fine.
For me, it's just going home and applying it and just
Have
kind of
enough
working
questions
out
so
what
you
my
can-
brain understands to actually putting it on the instrument.
Okay. So can I maybe, how does one do that? Might be a good question, which is pretty open-ended. But no, I think you're bringing up a great point, because part of what I'm trying to do with this is not to replace piano lessons, not to replace guitar lessons, and even not to replace artist coaching, but just to get us all on the same page of these concepts that don't get taught properly elsewhere, right? But I go back to what I said a minute ago. I think writing songs with these chords, and then on one hand is a good thing, and then looking at these example songs that I gave, especially the Leonard Jones and Andrew ones where there's different chord progressions that you're not used to, and going, okay, let me experiment with that. I would urge you to place a demand on your worship leaders and on your own gift to start doing things that are more challenging, that have more meat on the bones. But I find that if I go to my worship pastor and say, I want us to do deeper songs, more complex songs, they're going to rightly say, what do you got? Okay? As soon as you come up with a problem and you go to present it with leadership, if you're not also coming with a solution, all you are is just the guy in the back whining, in a sense, sometimes. So bring a couple songs that you dig, or even better, bring a couple songs that you've written that have some deeper meat on the bones. The worst thing they can do is say no. And then you start finding another outlet, not necessarily leaving your worship team, but another outlet that's going to handle these deeper expressions. Maybe that's a prayer room band that you get involved with that does the burns and the other kinds of things where the canvas is more open, you know. But you probably have a lot more influence than you realize in changing things, in shifting things, you know. I started touching this on the break, so I'll go ahead and say it here on the camera. It's a little tricky, though, for worship musicians who get excited about moving forward, and yet the music that we all do is simplistic, and it's getting more and more simplistic each year. Well, that's the trend, and it's continuing that path. Where do you go to stretch out? And a lot of people are upset with me about it, but I think in some ways, if you're not writing at that level, not able to compose the music that is tougher, maybe you have to go into the world. There's a lot of like piano players that I've taught on Skype or whatever, and they start getting into jazz things, and yet they've been a worship team member their whole life. And so to progress in that, I sent them to the community college and said, go take the jazz ensemble at the community college to get some, be around musicians that are placing that kind of demand on it. Leonard Jones actually, I think he made a cool statement one time. He said, I didn't really start progressing in music until I started composing and writing songs that I couldn't play right off. That's literally his mindset when he sits down to write a song. And you guys have heard
I've got to play it.
Right. But you guys, was it one or two of his songs we used as examples, and I encourage you to buy his album, and there's a new one he just recorded that's going to be coming out soon that's also full of really, really deep, cool musical stuff, yet it's great worship. It's killer lyrics. It's wonderful stuff. And he literally is sitting down with, I want to invent something in my mind that I didn't have to figure out how to play and practice a lot before I can ever play it. I thought it was brilliant. Consider that as a thought. Randy has a question. You just want chocolate?
On the flip side of that, when he says write songs, it doesn't mean you have to write the perfect song that all makes sense, and it doesn't have to have full 18,000 pages and measures. It's even if it's just a 4-measure ditty that uses that chord that makes sense to you, that sounds good, that you like, that puts that chord into use. That still counts.
Absolutely true. I love that you're bringing that up. In our mentorship that we're doing right now, I have 3 people that I'm on some variation of this process. One of them, 2 of them are doing, part of their assignment is 2 of them are both doing 2 songs a week in my inbox. And then one guy, I'm having him do a song a day in my inbox for the duration of the mentorship. Duration of the mentorship, the guys with the 2 a week, the daily guy, I'm only having him do it for 30 days because it starts getting silly. But in all cases, what I have to start off with is the way to write great songs, and by extension, the way to make better music and to become better as a musician is to write a whole lot of songs and to play a whole lot of music and keep trying new music and keep putting yourself into new musical situations. I know that in our circles, a lot of times I'm seen as kind of uber musician person. In other circles, I'm playing catch up. Not in church, but in other circles, I'm barely keeping up with the folks that are, and that's a reality, right? That may not make sense to where you are now, but I didn't spring forth from the womb with this facility and understanding. I was absolutely. I started taking piano when I was young, but all of these things I learned, figured out, and have done thousands and thousands and thousands of hours on my instrument, on music. And so now we have this, I can't believe we're going down this path, but thank you for bearing with me, because I'm at 5 more minutes before 9:30. We have this mentality in our culture that elevates and puts on pedestal the stars, the celebrity, the whatever. What that does is it says they are somehow special, they can somehow do what I could never do. Okay? Each of you is an artist. Each of you was created to create. And I did not spring forth from the womb being able to have the facility with these things that I have now. This was hours and hours. I don't know if your life path needs the thousands of hours that I've done in the way that I've done. Yours is going to be different. But it's going to take some time. It's going to take some work. So if you're going to write a lot of songs, in order to write great songs, that means by definition you're going to write a lot of bad songs. So I tell my mentees, these 3 of them, I said, I'm assuming, I'm planning, you and I are agreeing right now that these are not going to be good songs. They're not going to be great.
Oh, good. I've got some of those out of the way already.
Right, because if you got to write a great song, you're never going to write pen to paper because you're already, oh my gosh, and you're going to judge every single thing that's going down. No, you have to write a whole bunch to work the muscle, to make the mistakes and to learn the process. Now, along the way, once the spigot starts flowing, it starts growing really quickly, and they start improving really quickly. But you got to play a lot. You got to make a lot of wrong notes. Wait a second. What about this chord? Well, no. What about that chord? Well, no. I literally have done that exact process right there. I see you. and I've tried this chord, that chord, and the other for hours, and then I go, oh, but this one might work. Oh, whoa, there it is. Oh my gosh, this chord, that's really cool. And then I take that little thing that I just did, I analyze it, I go, oh, that was the flat 6 of the 2 or the 3. So when I hit that situation again, I can throw that guy in, and now I've got an arrow I put in my back pocket that I can pull out when needed, right? Jazz has a thing.
And this is what our creative foundation is teaching.
This is what our creative, yes. Yeah, Jack signed up. We've got a couple people online. We're doing the Creative Foundations and Strategies this month and Tabernacle of David Worship Revelation. Yeah, but go for it. How to apply it? I strongly urge you to take songs that you can't just figure out immediately, which disqualifies most of our worship songs. If you're playing a lot of worship all the time, you can hear it and you go, oh, yep, I went to that chord. Oh, yep, I went to that chord. Find stuff that doesn't make sense to you and get that Audacity thing and zoom in on it and go, now what's the bass line? Do it. And then once you've written it out and you feel like you've got the right chords, then go, okay, now why is this working? That went up a major third and that went down a fourth and, oh wait, that's a tonal center. Analyze it. It'll enrich you. And now, at some point, you take all of that stuff that you learn and you put it on the shelf and you just make music, right? But you can also never stop learning.